My name is Marilyn Moore, and the night I found that bank transfer, my marriage ended in silence. He thought I'd never see it. He thought I'd never connect the name to his affair. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I opened the will and let the last clause speak for me. If you've ever been betrayed by the person who promised to protect you, this story is for you. Drop a comment and hit subscribe. You're not alone anymore. There's a moment, right before betrayal fully lands, where the world stands still. You don't cry. You don't scream. You just stare at the thing that shouldn't exist. And yet, there it is. My husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen table, the screen lighting up against the dark granite counter like a silent confession. I hadn't touched it. I didn't need to. I wasn't even snooping. It was just there. Unlocked. Open. Waiting. The notification came from our bank. $14,200. Wire transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Underneath, a message. Transfer complete to primary. K. Delaney. I felt my breath catch. K. Delaney. I didn't know a K. Delaney, but I'd just spent the last 5 years married to a man who apparently did. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam curled around the bathroom door. I could hear him humming, relaxed, innocent. He always sang in the shower after his late shifts. He always came home smelling like some kind of new cologne I hadn't bought. He always left his phone out, like a man with nothing to hide. I didn't say anything that night. Not when he kissed my forehead. Not when he made himself a drink. Not even when he climbed into bed beside me and placed a warm hand on my waist. Because I needed to know more than what I thought. I needed to prove it. And that's where everything began to unravel. It started 2 days later. I waited until he left for work, always at 7:15 a.m. sharp, briefcase in hand, dress shirt immaculate, and I logged into the bank account we shared. We rarely checked it. It was our emergency fund, our retirement plan, our just-in-case-the-world-falls-apart cushion. But it had fallen apart. I just didn't know it yet. The transfer to K. Delaney wasn't the only one. There were 6, spaced out over 3 months. The amounts got smaller over time, as if he were trying to avoid triggering any red flags. I remember just sitting there in my robe, holding my tea with both hands like it could anchor me to the earth. I went numb. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the numbers. 80% of our savings were gone. Vanished, and every penny had gone to the same name. K. Delaney. I scrolled, sick to my stomach, trying to make sense of it. The descriptions were vague. Consulting. Debt consolidation. Private contract. But one stood out. Private gift. No return. I nearly laughed. The audacity of it. I needed answers, not guesses, not maybes. So I waited and watched. That Friday, he told me he had a corporate dinner. Investors from Seattle, he said. He even pulled out his gray blazer, the one he reserved for serious occasions. You don't need to come, he added casually. It's gonna be boring. Then he kissed my cheek, straightened his collar, and left. I followed him 20 minutes later. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe I thought he really was telling the truth. Maybe I just wanted to catch him in a lie and confront him in the restaurant like some melodramatic movie scene. But what I saw wasn't a corporate dinner. It was him, her. Candlelight. I sat in my car across the street, parked under a flickering lamppost that buzzed like a fly, and I watched the man I married lean in and tuck a strand of hair behind a woman's ear. She was maybe early 30s, curly brunette, navy dress, confident in a way I hadn't felt in years. And when she smiled, God, when she smiled, it wasn't just flirtation, it was intimacy. Like this had been going on for a long time. He reached into his jacket pocket and slid something across the table. A card? A check? I zoomed in with my phone, but it was too dark. What I could see, though, was the name on the reservation slip sitting in front of the host. Delaney. K. Delaney. I think I stopped breathing. I didn't get out. Didn't confront. Didn't cry. I drove away slowly. the silence in my car so thick I could barely hear the engine. Back home, I sat in our living room, staring at the wall like it might give me a solution. And then something clicked. Our will. The document we signed 5 years ago, after his uncle died unexpectedly. It had a clause, one I'd insisted on, buried in the fine print. A clause that said if either of us moved any large amount of money from the joint account, it had to be either for our children or under proof of medical emergency. Or else, well, let's just say the last clause didn't leave room for infidelity. I hadn't looked at that paper in years, but I remembered what came next, and I knew exactly what I had to do, because this time, he wasn't just going to walk away with my heart. He was going to learn exactly what happens when you activate the last clause. Before all this, I thought I had a good life. Not a perfect one, not some dreamy, glossy romance novel, but good, comfortable, safe. I was the type of woman who made chicken soup from scratch on Sundays and labeled leftovers with masking tape and Sharpie. I watered the garden at exactly 8 a.m., rain or shine. I kept 2 calendars, one digital, one paper, and updated them religiously. It wasn't about control. It was about care. I cared. Deeply. Maybe more than he ever deserved. James and I met at a nonprofit fundraiser 11 years ago. I was volunteering. He was the keynote speaker, charismatic, successful, sharp. He had this voice that made everyone stop mid-bite. And when he looked at me from across the room, something clicked. He once told me, "You're like fresh air, the kind that smells like rain." I never forgot that line. It was the first time I felt truly seen. We married 2 years later. Small ceremony. My parents cried. His didn't show up. Something about his father's gout flaring up again. Looking back, I should have taken that as a clue. But I didn't. I just tightened the bouquet in my hands and smiled wider. We didn't have children. At first, it was a choice. Then it became a quiet ache. One we didn't talk about, not really. But we had each other. We had our home. A charming 3-bedroom in Portland's Southeast District, with ivy climbing up the back wall and a porch swing that squeaked every third sway. James loved that house. He called it his fortress of peace. I always laughed at that, because I was the one who made it peaceful. I paid the bills, handled the grocery lists, washed the sheets, remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and that weird cheese his boss liked. He'd leave sticky notes sometimes. "Thanks for the dinner, babe. You're the glue. Couldn't do this without you." They meant the world, until they didn't. James worked in tech consulting. Freelance mostly. Big clients, long hours, lots of travel. Or so I thought. At the time, I believed every delayed flight and late dinner was just part of the hustle. He was always on, always connected, always just one phone call away from fixing something no one else could. I used to brag about him, called him a magician, told my friends, he's the kind of man who solves problems for a living. He even helps hospitals streamline patient systems. How cool is that? He smiled every time I said it, but not once did he ever say, "That's not entirely true." It wasn't until later that I realized how vague his job had become. He used to name drop clients, mention locations, tell stories. Now, it was just client stuff, too technical to explain. Boring work details, you don't want to hear it. And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? Our mornings were quiet, patterned. He'd kiss me on the forehead, always on the forehead. I'd pack him a smoothie and a small container of mixed nuts because he said it kept him sharp. He'd leave at 7:15 a.m., just like clockwork. And I'd stay behind, sip coffee by the window, feed the neighborhood cats that somehow thought I was their mother, and get to work on my freelance bookkeeping. I thought that rhythm meant trust. That repetition meant love. Turns out, it only meant habit. One evening, about 3 months before the transfer I found, I noticed something odd. We were at dinner with his old college friend Lyle. one of those guys who always talks too loud and drinks too fast. And halfway through his third beer, Lyle turned to me and said, "So, how's James liking his new toy?" I blinked. "New toy?" Lyle laughed. "You know, that Porsche he keeps posting on Instagram. You must have seen it." I shook my head slowly. James cut in quick, smooth. That was just a rental. Test drive thing for a client in LA. Didn't want to bother you with it, babe." He smiled, tilted his head, touched my knee under the table, but his hand was cold. That was the first red flag. Not just the lie, the ease of it. The way it rolled off his tongue like he'd rehearsed it, like he'd lied before. Another time, I saw a tiny smudge of pink lipstick on the inside collar of his white button-down. Not bright, not obvious, but unmistakable. I asked about it. He laughed, said it must have been from a coworker's hug. "Amanda hugs everyone," he said. "Even the janitor. I'll tell her to tone it down." He kissed me that night like nothing happened, and I let him, because I didn't want to seem paranoid, because I thought marriages had to bend to survive, because I didn't want to admit I'd been ignoring the signs. Then there were the numbers. At night, when I'd sit down to balance our monthly expenses, I noticed charges I couldn't place. Restaurants we'd never been to. Boutiques with names like Velvet Season and Orchid Eve. One time, a $210 charge at a luxury spa. On the same weekend, he said he was out of town for a conference. I asked him. He shrugged. Gift for a client's wife. Business stuff. Always business. Always convenient. Always just out of reach. And yet, I loved him. There's a kind of softness that comes after a decade with someone. Even when they start to pull away, you cling harder, not because you don't know the truth, but because you hope you're wrong. Because the life you built together isn't just a house and bank account. It's birthdays and inside jokes. It's a drawer full of movie ticket stubs and postcards from gas stations you both thought were funny. That's what betrayal ruins. Not just trust, but the memory of trust. There was one night, and I can't forget this, where we stood on the porch during a light spring rain. He had just come home, late again, and I was curled up on the swing with a blanket. He stood behind me, arms wrapping around my shoulders, and whispered, "If I ever lost you, I don't know what I'd do." And I believed him. Every syllable, every pause, every beat between his breath. But now I know. If he ever lost me, he had someone else already waiting. The biggest assumption I carried back then? That love meant safety. That loyalty was mutual. That because I gave him everything, my time, my faith, my forgiveness, he would never weaponize it against me. But James didn't just break a promise. He cashed it out, transferred it line by line, and signed it over to someone else. He didn't just betray me. He made me the fool who never saw it coming. But that part of me? The one who made excuses, kept quiet, curled up like a house cat waiting to be let back in? She was gone. And what rose in her place was a woman who knew exactly where the power was buried. I didn't sleep the night I saw him with her. My body lay still beside him in our bed, the same bed we'd shared for years. But inside I was tumbling, spiraling. Something deep inside me had cracked open, and now I was trying to keep the pieces from spilling everywhere. My husband, the man who once called me his lighthouse, was now sending money, our money, to a woman who wore navy dresses and accepted things across candlelit tables. I couldn't breathe without choking on the image. I couldn't blink without seeing his hand brush her cheek. My body was in that bed, but my soul had already left the house. The next morning, I waited until he left before I moved. I didn't cry. Not yet. I made coffee like I always did, spooned 2 sugars like he liked, out of habit, not kindness, and set his travel mug by the door. He kissed me on the forehead again, and I didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't ask, "How was your dinner?" Because I already knew the answer. When the door shut behind him, I sank to the kitchen floor and finally let my face collapse into my hands. The sob that came out didn't sound human. It sounded ancient, like something that had been living in my ribs for years, waiting for permission to scream. I curled forward, knees to chest, like a child, rocking, breath hitching, stomach aching from holding it all in. This wasn't just grief. It was humiliation. It was the memory of every time I'd defended him, the memory of every time I'd ignored my gut to protect his reputation. I was mourning someone who was still alive and lying to me before breakfast. That same day, I opened our fireproof safe and pulled out the will. We had signed it 5 years ago, in the presence of our lawyer and 2 witnesses, after his uncle passed unexpectedly from a stroke. I hadn't thought about it since. The pages were crisp, the ink still sharp, but the part I needed was near the back. The clause I had fought to include, something my father had always warned me to add, just in case. And there it was, clear as day. In the event of any substantial withdrawal, exceeding 10%, from the joint savings or retirement account, without the documented consent of both parties, and outside of medical emergencies or provisions for a dependent child, the violating party shall forfeit all rights to shared marital assets, effective immediately. I had it notarized. I had it signed. And James had signed it too, because back then he said, "We'll never need this, but sure if it gives you peace of mind." He had no idea that clause would become my sword. But I wasn't ready to swing it. Not yet, because beneath all the legal power, I was still broken. The next week was a blur. I went through the motions like a ghost, smiled at the neighbors, answered emails, took phone calls from clients. But I was hollow. I could hear my voice, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me. I was outside my own skin. Sometimes I sat in the shower for hours, letting the hot water scald my back until my skin turned red. Sometimes I wandered the aisles of the grocery store, staring at soup cans like they were in a foreign language. Once, I stood in our bedroom doorway and watched him sleep, wondering how someone so peaceful could be so cruel. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my best friend, not even my mother. Because how do you say it out loud? He's giving our savings to the woman he's sleeping with. I didn't want their pity, didn't want their rage. I wanted someone to hold me and say, "You're not crazy for missing him, even now." Because that's the part no one tells you. You still miss them, even when they're monsters, even when they're gutting you from the inside out. But beneath the grief, there was rage. Not the kind that explodes. No, mine simmered. Quiet. Cold. Calculated. I started documenting. Screenshots of bank transfers, logs of dates, times, locations, a copy of the restaurant reservation under her name, even phone records. I pulled them through the provider portal he never changed the password for. I built a file, a folder of his betrayal. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but holding it, building it, gave me back pieces of myself. One afternoon, he came home with roses, my favorite kind, white with pink tips. "Just thinking about you," he said. "You've seemed a little off lately." He wrapped his arms around me. His chin rested on my shoulder, and I stood there, still, off. That's what I was to him. Off, like a machine glitching, like a thermostat slightly broken. I wanted to scream, "I saw you feed her creme brulee with your own spoon." I wanted to throw the roses in his face and drag him to the safe. But I didn't. I smiled. I whispered, "Thank you." And I placed the flowers in the vase I bought the year we got married. Because I needed him to stay calm. I needed him to keep thinking I was blind. Because when the moment came, I didn't want an argument. I wanted results. The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't happen in one moment. It happened every morning when I woke up beside him. Every night when I heard him laugh at his phone and lie about the client who won't stop texting. Every time he kissed me like it was a chore. It happened slowly. And then, all at once. Because there's something about betrayal that doesn't just break your heart. It fractures your identity. I wasn't Marilyn Moore, wife. I was a placeholder, a decoy. A cover story for a man who had built a double life on my love and my loyalty. I started to question everything. Had he ever loved me? Did he hold me at night and think about her? Was I just the safe option while she got the passion? I found myself Googling her name. Catherine Delaney. That's who she was. She worked in marketing. Divorced. No kids. Gorgeous in that effortless Pacific Northwest way. And judging by her tagged photos, she loved boats. James hated boats. But there he was, on her Instagram, holding a champagne flute on a deck off the Columbia River. He never posted it. But she did. The caption read, "Some people are worth the risk." A sea of heart emojis followed. And suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. That night, I pulled out the will again. I laid it flat on the dining room table, and I whispered to myself, like a promise, "You forgot the last clause, James." But I didn't. There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It brings echo. It brings the sound of your own breath ricocheting off walls that used to hold laughter. That was my house now. Too quiet. Too still. The kind of stillness that makes you think you've gone deaf or mad or both. After building my evidence folder and confirming what I already knew, I didn't strike immediately. I couldn't. Because I was tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix, and scared in a way that logic couldn't calm. I told myself I needed time to plan. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was planning for anymore. Because I was gone. Somewhere in the cracks between betrayal and clarity, I had disappeared. The days bled together. I started forgetting to eat. Emails piled up. Deadlines missed. I left the laundry in the washer for 2 days until it reeked. And then I cried like a child over sour towels. I wasn't healing. I was decaying. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without flinching. Not because of how I looked, but because of the eyes staring back. They didn't look like mine. They looked haunted. I stopped brushing my hair. Stopped wearing mascara. Stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. And even then, I wore sunglasses like armor, to hide from the world and myself. James, of course, didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Either way, his routine never faltered. Still up at 6:30. Still out by 7:15, still pretending. One night, I asked him casually, "Do you love me?" He blinked. "Of course. What kind of question is that?" I nodded, smiled, sipped my tea, and inside, something sharp turned. I wasn't asking because I believed in his answer. I was asking to measure how easily he could lie. I tried therapy. A woman named Helen, mid-50s, no-nonsense voice and kind eyes. I sat on her couch and told her about my missing savings, the affair, the will. She didn't gasp. Didn't judge. She said, "You've been emotionally hijacked. Now you need to take back the wheel." I went every Tuesday for 5 weeks. She helped. A little. She gave me words I didn't have. Emotional displacement. Narcissistic masking. Trauma bonding. They sounded clinical, detached. But they gave me distance from the wound. Made it feel like maybe I wasn't crazy for still wishing he'd reach for my hand in the dark. But healing isn't linear. And grief doesn't care about your therapist's schedule. One afternoon, in a rare attempt at normalcy, I decided to meet an old friend for lunch. Jennifer from my college days. She didn't know anything about the affair. I hadn't told her. I wanted to feel regular, like myself again. We met at a cafe downtown, a little place with big windows and rosemary lemonade. We hugged. We ordered. We laughed a little. And then it happened. As we were leaving, I saw them, James and Catherine, across the street, holding hands, laughing like they were 20, free, careless, magnetic. He leaned in and kissed her, right there, on the street, in public. I stood frozen on the curb, Jennifer beside me mid-sentence, her eyes following mine. She stopped speaking. "Oh my God," she whispered. And I just smiled, the kind of smile that covers a scream. I walked back to my car like I was fine, sat behind the wheel, turned off the music, and drove straight to an empty parking lot. There, I broke again. Worse than before. This time it wasn't silent. This time I screamed, punched the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Because they were winning. Because she had my money, my husband, and now, my neighborhood. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. And I had let it fester this long, thinking I could outwait it. That night, I threw out our wedding photos. Every last one. Even the candids I used to love. I opened every drawer, every closet, every box in the attic, and started purging. I threw away cards, gifts, anniversary letters. I threw away the robe he gave me on our second Christmas. I even threw away the pasta maker we bought together after watching Chef's Table. It all went in trash bags. 9 in total. I dragged them to the curb with shaking arms and no shoes. Neighbors peeked through windows. I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them guess. Let them see the unraveling. For a few days I felt empty. But not in a painful way. More like clean. There's something purifying about getting rid of things that hold lies. It makes room, not for hope, but for clarity. It was around this time that I started talking to someone unexpected, Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor. She was 72, sharp as a whip, and had seen more heartbreak than most soap operas. Widowed 3 times, breast cancer survivor, 2 estranged children. She came over with lemon cookies one morning after seeing me sit on the porch for 3 hours without moving. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. I shook my head. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. She just sat beside me, eating cookies and humming a Sinatra song. Eventually, I told her everything. I don't know why. Maybe because she didn't flinch. Maybe because her silence felt safer than words. When I finished, she took a long sip of her tea and said, "You're not broken, Marilyn. You're just unfinished." That line stayed with me. I wrote it on a Post-it, stuck it on my bathroom mirror, read it every morning with puffy eyes and cracked lips. I started doing small things, walking again, listening to music that didn't remind me of him, reconnecting with clients I'd ghosted, reading. I even bought myself new bed sheets, not white, not beige, deep navy, the kind that made my skin look like it belonged to someone else, someone bolder. I was still broken, but I was no longer waiting to be saved. And then came the false hope. James came home late one evening, this time looking different. Not smug, not polished, rattled. He poured a drink without speaking, didn't take off his shoes, just stared out the kitchen window. After a long silence, he finally said, "Things aren't going how I thought they would." I looked up, waited. He turned toward me, eyes softer than I'd seen in months. "I miss us." The words landed like poison dressed as perfume. Sweet on the surface, rotten underneath. He stepped closer, held my gaze. "I know I've made mistakes. But you're my home, Marilyn." For a split second, God forgive me, my heart fluttered. Because trauma does that. It rewires the part of you that confuses pain with love. But then I remembered her Instagram, the candlelit dinner, the missing savings. And I realized he wasn't sorry. He was lonely. Maybe she dumped him. Maybe his fantasy started to rot. But me? I was his backup plan. And I don't play backup. That night, I made my decision. Not just to activate the clause, but to cut ties with the version of myself that stayed quiet. That watered dead plants. That begged ghosts to come back. The sacrifice? Letting go of the dream. The marriage. The illusion that if I just loved hard enough, he'd come home for real. No. He lost me the moment he wired our future to another woman. Now it was my turn, to wire something of my own. The first time I laughed, genuinely laughed, it caught me off guard. I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store when the man behind me pointed out I was trying to pay with a hotel key card. I looked down, blinked twice, then cracked up so hard I had to steady myself on the shopping cart. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was messy, loud, full-body joy. and it was mine. God, I had missed that sound. Because for months, my world had been made of glass, fragile, quiet, reflecting everyone's expectations except my own. But now I was building something real. The first change was small. I deleted his contact. Not blocked. Deleted. I didn't need reminders. Didn't want to see James M. popping up on my screen, pulling me back into old patterns. He could live in the void now, right where he belonged. I also stopped stalking Catherine's Instagram. That part was hard. I used to check it daily like a habit, scrolling through her curated life with a mix of hate and masochism. But one morning, I typed her handle and stopped. I just sat there, staring at the search bar, and then I closed the app. Because what she had wasn't what I wanted anymore. I threw myself into my work. Bookkeeping had always been something I did to fill the time, pay a few bills, feel useful. But now, it became my anchor. I revamped my website, hired a copywriter, branded myself as a specialist for women-owned businesses and divorcees starting over. The irony wasn't lost on me. By month 3, I had doubled my client base. By month 5, I had corporate leads. By month 6, I had my own office space in a co-working hub downtown. I painted one wall teal, bought a sleek desk, hung a framed quote above the entry that read, "Build what they said you'd never recover from." And every time I walked in, I felt taller, more rooted, more me. My body changed too. Not from revenge workouts or crash diets, but from care. I started walking in the mornings again. Long walks through Laurelhurst Park, sometimes in silence, sometimes with music. I bought myself flowers every Saturday. Roses. The kind I liked, not the ones he used to buy as apologies. I danced in the kitchen while making eggs. I lit candles for no reason. I sat in cafes with a journal and wrote down what I wanted, not what I feared. I even dyed my hair a deep auburn. My stylist squealed when she spun me around. "You look dangerous," she said. "I feel ready," I replied. And somewhere in all that newness, someone else appeared. His name was Theo. We met at a small business networking mixer, the kind I used to dread but now embraced like playgrounds for my next chapter. He was tall, thoughtful, quiet in a way that made every word feel deliberate. He asked about my work, not just my marital status. And when I told him, without flinching, that I was recovering from a brutal betrayal, he didn't pity me. He respected me. We had coffee, then lunch, then a long walk where we talked about everything from grief to poetry. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to fix me. He was just present. I didn't fall in love right away. I wasn't ready for that. But I let someone see me again, and that alone felt like a miracle. Emotionally, I was different too. Sharper, but softer. Not guarded, just aware. I listened to my instincts now. I trusted the pause in my gut, the warning bells in my chest. Helen, my therapist, once told me, forgiveness isn't always an act of grace. Sometimes it's a declaration of power. I didn't forgive James to let him off the hook. I forgave him to unhook myself from the wreckage, to stop carrying his sins in my bones. And with that forgiveness came a kind of peace I never expected. Not the fake peace of pretending everything's fine. Real peace. The kind that hums beneath your skin and makes room for silence without shame. One rainy Thursday, I visited my lawyer. We sat across from each other in her glass-walled office while downtown Portland flickered behind her. Gray clouds and city light reflections. I handed her the evidence folder. All of it. Bank statements, phone logs, photos, a printed copy of the will with the last clause highlighted. She flipped through it in silence. Then she looked at me, impressed. "You built a solid case," she said. I nodded. "I built a new life. The case just came with it." She smiled, and we began to draw up the paperwork. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful, not anymore. What I had, my business, my identity, my peace, that was enough. But power knows when the tide is turning. And something told me James was about to come back into my life. Not with roses, not with apologies, with resistance. Because men like him, they don't lose gracefully. They get desperate. And when they realize their safety net has cut the cords clean, they scramble. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew this story wasn't finished. The clause was loaded. The paperwork was drafted. The strength was mine now. And when he came knocking, I'd be ready to answer. It was raining the morning James called. Not pouring, just that slow, steady kind of Portland drizzle that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. I was in my office lighting a cedarwood candle and reviewing client invoices when the phone buzzed. His name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. I answered on the fourth ring. Not out of urgency, but out of choice. "Hey," he said, voice low, careful. "Can we talk?" I didn't ask what it was about. I didn't fill the silence. I just said, "Come by the house at 6. Then I hung up. I hadn't seen him in weeks. Not since that night he came home with softness in his eyes and nostalgia in his hands. Back then, I hadn't been ready to sever it completely. But now I was made of steel and stillness. I wore a navy blouse, the same color Catherine wore that night I followed him. Not as a jab, as a mirror. Let him see what presence looks like when it doesn't come with betrayal. My hair was tied back. My makeup simple. I looked like myself, but sharper. Clean lines, clear voice, no tremble. He arrived right on time. Same blazer, same cologne, but something about him was smaller. His eyes darted, his hands fidgeted. It was the look of a man who had built his kingdom on sand and heard the first waves crash. I opened the door without a word. He stepped in, paused, took in the changes. The hallway was brighter now, walls repainted, family photos gone. There was nothing left of us in this house. I barely recognized it, he muttered. "I know," I replied. My voice didn't shake. We sat at the dining table, the same one where we'd once shared anniversary dinners and fought over taxes. But now, it was just wood and truth. He cleared his throat. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't nod, didn't flinch. I let him fill the silence. I made a mistake. A lot of them. He rubbed his palms together, searching for sincerity. "She left, by the way." I looked up. He added quickly, "Catherine, she's not in the picture anymore." I watched him. "That matters why?" I asked. He blinked, didn't have an answer. I leaned back in my chair. "Is that what this is? Regret because she left?" "No, it's not that. I messed everything up, Marilyn. I see that now. And maybe I was scared. Of how safe you made me feel. Of how much I didn't deserve you. There it was. The script. The monologue of the man who betrayed and came back with poetry. The tragic hero of his own creation. But I wasn't clapping. I slid a folder across the table. The manila kind that holds endings. He opened it, brows pulling together. Inside, the clause, the highlighted section, the notarized signatures, and the petition, filed, stamped, irrevocable. His eyes flicked up. He didn't speak. I filled the silence. Every transfer, every message, every lie, cataloged, dated, documented. I tapped the paper. "This clause? It's not symbolic. It's law. You breached it. Repeatedly." Still, he said nothing. Just stared like a boy caught stealing from the offering plate. I stood, walked to the window, let the rain whisper while he processed the ruins of what he thought he still had. He finally spoke. "You really went through with it?" I turned slowly. Met his eyes. "I didn't go through with it, James. I honored it. Something you never did." He swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd use it, that clause. You said it was just a precaution." I smiled. A small, sad one. "I also said I'd never stay if you cheated." I paused. "But here we are. He stood up abruptly, walked to the mantel, stared at the empty spot where our wedding photo used to be. "You really changed everything," he said softly. His reflection stared back at him in the dark glass. "You could have had this," I replied, voice calm. "All of this. The peace, the partnership, the home. You had the best version of me." He turned, and for the first time, I saw regret. Not performance, real, stomach-sick, too-late regret. He whispered, "I didn't know she'd leave." And that's when I said the line I'd been holding in for months. "You didn't lose me because she left, James. You lost me the moment you believed I'd never leave." He sat down slowly, like the words had weight, like they had knees. I didn't cry, not once, because grief has a shelf life, and mine had expired. We went over the logistics, divisions, accounts, house. I gave him what the will allowed, no more, no less. I watched him sign his name to his own undoing, and when he handed me the pen, he didn't look up. He lingered at the door when it was over, looking at me like he wanted a final word. I gave him one. "Next time you choose comfort over character, at least read the fine print." He nodded, eyes glossy, but I didn't let myself believe it meant anything. Because tears don't equal change, and regret doesn't erase damage. He stepped into the rain, closed the door behind him, and just like that, it was over. There's a stillness that comes after the storm. Not silence, stillness. Like the world doesn't need to shout anymore because it's finally listening. That's where I live now. In the quiet hum of peace. In mornings that don't begin with worry, and nights that don't end in pretense. I don't check his location anymore. I don't measure my worth in someone else's promises. And I don't hold my breath waiting for love to return in a shape it never fit. I wake up in clean sheets. Navy, soft, warm against my legs. There's no second toothbrush in the holder, no razors on the sink. Just me, and I like it that way. My mornings are sacred now. I stretch with the sun. I pour slow coffee. I open the windows and let the breeze touch everything I once guarded. Peace isn't loud. It's rhythm. It's choosing yourself, over and over again, without guilt. I never sent the letter I wrote him. It's still in my desk drawer, folded neatly inside an envelope with no stamp. It says, "I loved you" in full sentences. You responded with ellipses. And I will never again shrink to fit between your pauses. That's it. That's all it needed to say. People always ask if I'm dating again. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. I've had dinners, long walks, conversations that feel like poetry, but I'm not chasing anything. Because the only thing I ever needed to find was me. Theo and I stayed friends, maybe more, maybe less. But he taught me something important. That not every man is a thief in disguise. Some are mirrors, some are lighthouses, and some are just kind people who arrive at the exact moment you stop expecting rescue. My business is thriving. I work with women who've clawed their way back from ashes, just like I did. Every time I help someone reclaim control of their finances or build a business from scratch, I feel like I'm rewriting the story, not just mine, but ours. The collective us. The women who were underestimated, dismissed, betrayed, and still rose. I walk more now, not to escape, but to arrive. To be in this moment, in this breath, in this body I once criticized and then rediscovered. Laurelhurst Park is still my favorite. There's this one bench near the pond where I sit most Sundays with a book I rarely open. Sometimes I bring breadcrumbs for the ducks. Sometimes I bring just myself. Last weekend, a young couple sat near me, holding hands, whispering dreams. And instead of envy or bitterness, I felt something gentle, hope. Not for them. For me. Because I know now. Love isn't something you win or lose. It's something you live in. Even alone. James hasn't reached out again. The last thing I saw from him was a short email confirming the asset transfer and a single line. "I hope you find happiness." I read it, closed it, deleted it, because I already had. Sometimes, in the middle of a quiet evening, I find myself whispering a thank you. Not to him. To the woman I used to be. The one who stayed too long. The one who forgave too easily. The one who cried over towels and timelines and trust funds. She held the line until I could take the baton. And I love her for that. Because without her, I wouldn't be here. Here. In a life that fits. In a home that breathes. In a version of myself that doesn't wait to be chosen. Because I already did. And that choice? That's the love story. The one that finally ends the right way. If my story resonated with you in any way, thank you for staying with me until the end. Sometimes, the quietest strength is walking away with your dignity still intact. If you've ever been through something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts or experience in the comments. You're not alone. And if this story touched you, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories like this one. See you next time.